Straight talk from Israel. You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio. You're listening to the Jay Shapiro Show.
Hello, everybody. This is Jay Shapiro. Thanks for listening. I think I may have mentioned in the past, maybe even a few times, that there's a Chinese curse which says, I hope you live in interesting times. And that curse seems to be upon us. I don't even know where to start this week. First, our Prime Minister, Netanyahu, is awaiting a series of court appearances because he's accused of bribery. And at the same time, he's doing things in the field of Israel's foreign relations that no one could have dreamed of even 5 years ago. We're establishing relations with 3 Arab countries, the UAR, Bahrain, and Sudan. Now, it is true that those countries don't border on Israel, but now the word is out that our Prime Minister visited Saudi Arabia last week, together with the American Secretary of State. It was announced last week also that Jonathan Pollard is being released and will be able to come to Israel. And the response here in Israel, believe it or not, is very mixed. Most people want him to be welcomed with fanfare and open arms, and yet there are a few who say that since he got paid for spying for Israel, there should be no fanfare or hullabaloo on his arrival. And in another topic, an Israeli military hero has been suggested as the head of Yad Vashem, the Holocaust Memorial here in Jerusalem. But some people, including Holocaust survivors, have come out against his appointment because he has publicly said that the Arabs are a hostile population that should be thrown out of Israel. So it turns out that in Israel, you cannot not only please everybody on any issue, but apparently you can't please anybody on any issue. At any rate, one of the interesting things about Israel is that there is never a dull moment, and there is always what to argue about, and everything is of interest here to everybody. I'll be back after the break.
Israel is located in one of the most volatile areas in the world. Israel is an island of stability in a sea of war and unrest. In the midst of this turmoil, Israel stands out as a beacon of order and human progress. Each week we update you on what's happening in this, the Jewish state, a true light unto the nations. This is Jay Shapiro. Join me every Thursday on Israel News Talk Radio.
You're listening to the Jay Shapiro Show.
You're back with Jay Shapiro. We are now, between now and January, in a very sensitive, historic period of time, because there's a good possibility, a probability, that Trump will no longer be president after January. So in the coming months, there appears to be movements on the part of the Trump administration to further entrench the Trump policy with regard to Israel's control in Judea and Samaria, and particularly Jerusalem. And that's what I want to talk about. Secretary of State Pompeo was here last week, and he spoke in broad terms, but he didn't specify what actions would be taken in the next couple months. But there were some gestures that were very interesting. He visited the Psagot winery, which is in the Benjamin region of the West Bank, and the State Department made a declaration when he left that settlement products can be labeled made in Israel. While historic in nature, they do not replace U.S. recognition of Israel's sovereignty over settlements. But the very fact that the Secretary of State said that made in Israel can be written on a bottle of wine produced in just north of Jerusalem in what's called the West Bank is very significant. The Trump administration suspended Israeli plans to annex settlements in exchange for a deal that the United States brokered between Israel and the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain under what's called the Abraham Accords. So by getting these put together, these accords, one of the conditions was that Israel suspend plans for annexing, particularly the Jordan Valley. See, since the accords are one of Trump's most significant and likely successful diplomatic movements, he is unlikely to risk jeopardizing those deals. Even Biden said he would not go back on any of these. Now, in the next couple months, the place where the administration can still make a significant difference with regard to sovereignty has to do with Jerusalem, specifically with U.S. recognition of Israel's sovereignty over most of East Jerusalem. Back in 2019, the Trump administration recognized Israeli sovereignty over the Golan Heights, but it did not take a similar step over East Jerusalem. In the meantime, the Palestinian Authority has successfully harnessed international sentiment, such as that of the United Kingdom, to successfully pass a UN resolution disavowing Israeli and Jewish ties to Jerusalem. The Trump administration countered that with a series of strong steps in support of Israeli and Jewish ties to Jerusalem, which of course is our biblical capital. Back in 2017, Trump recognized that Jerusalem was not only part of Israel, but also its capital. His administration relocated its embassy to Jerusalem and has allowed U.S. citizens born in Jerusalem to register their country of birth as Israel if they so choose. This, several years ago, this was a court case, Supreme Court case, and the court ruled that you couldn't mention Israel if someone was born in Jerusalem. Previous administrations had forbidden Americans born in Jerusalem from registering Israel as their country of birth. Now, Trump has also started what he calls a planned peace to prosperity to resolve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, which allows for Israel to retain all the portions of Jerusalem located within the boundaries of the security barrier. It excluded only those Palestinian areas within the city's municipal boundaries, but outside the barrier, which it said would be part of a future Palestinian state. When Trump first announced recognition of Jerusalem as Israel's capital, he was very careful to state that he did so without prejudice for any final status agreement between Israel and the Palestinians. Since saying that, the Trump administration has walked a very fine line between referring to Jerusalem as part of Israel, while at the same time allowing for confusion to reign as to whether it has been recognized Israel's sovereignty in East Jerusalem. So when the U.S. changed the birth designation for Jerusalem passports, it applied a policy for disputed areas, rather than a blanket assertion. Those who want only registered a place of birth as Jerusalem without mentioning Israel can continue to do so. So it's a step that leaves open a possibility that the administration hasn't completely recognized sovereignty over Jerusalem. Now, that's a subtlety that's been lost on many who already consider that the U.S. recognized Israel's sovereignty in all of Jerusalem. There's some experts like Eugene Kontorovich, who's in International Law School at George Mason University, pointed to the location of the U.S. Embassy in Jerusalem as proof that the U.S. has already recognized Israel's sovereignty in East Jerusalem. Now, where is the embassy exactly? Well, it's a very interesting thing. The U.S. Embassy, which is about a mile from where I live here in Jerusalem, it actually straddles the Green Line, which was the border up until 1967. Part of the property is in West Jerusalem, while other parts of the property are located over the pre-1967 lines. So that area is considered by the international community to be part of East Jerusalem, but was technically a small tract of no man's land between Israel-held West Jerusalem and Jordanian-held East Jerusalem between 1949 and 1967. When U.S. officials speak of Jerusalem, they mean the whole city, and they visit all parts of the city within its municipal boundaries. Even the U.S. embassy itself is located across the 1949 armistice line and an area that the European Union and the United Nations consider to be East Jerusalem, which is a clear proof that the U.S. recognized Israeli sovereignty over the entire city. So that is recognition. Perhaps this has to be clarified again. Should the Trump administration officially take that step, declaring all of Jerusalem to be an Israeli sovereignty, it could argue, as it already has done, that it was not introducing new U.S. policy, but simply acting on existing policy as set out by bipartisan congressional resolutions such as the 1995 U.S. Embassy Act, which said that the American embassy should be moved to Jerusalem. So, and there's another point too, it's not so subtle. U.S. recognition of Israeli sovereignty over all of Jerusalem could go a step in the direction of making the American evangelical movement happy with regard to the Trump administration's, because Trump originally said he wanted to allow Israel to annex the settlements, and that made the evangelicals very happy, but that annexation has been held up now. So just before he left Israel, and this is significant, just before he left Israel last week, the Secretary of State, Pompeo, tweeted, "Wheels up from the magnificent city of Jerusalem, the eternal capital of Israel." It was a statement that reflected the depth of Pompeo's regard for both Jerusalem now and as the ancient biblical history. Now, what is left now? It remains to be seen if the Trump administration, in the next couple of months, will rest on its laurels vis-a-vis Jerusalem, or if, in its last weeks, it will further cement its support for united Jerusalem with a formal policy to recognize Israeli sovereignty over all or most of East Jerusalem also. And that would be something that a Biden administration would have great difficulty in doing away with. So Trump has been the most favorable to Israel president that we've had. And not just that, as far as Israel per se is concerned, but helping to make deals with other Arab countries. And for that, he deserves much credit. I'll be back after the break.
The Tamar Yona Show.
Tamar? She's sassy.
She's smart.
She's funny.
But she's also a real Jewish mother.
Hi, everybody. I'm Tamar Yona. And yes, I can be all of those things. But at Israel News Talk Radio, I'm here to bring you the news stories and guests that you may not hear anywhere else. Join me live on air Sundays, Mondays, and Tuesdays for the most unique and bold talk radio in Israel.
The Tamar Yona Show.
Psalm 23, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. Did you know this psalm and many others were composed by a Jewish shepherd and musician who later became a king? Would you like to know some of the inner meanings of psalms to help you connect with God and strengthen your soul? An exciting and easy-to-read book is now available which will help you do just that. Software for the Soul, Psalms for Everyone, available on Kindle, Audible, and Amazon.com. Software for the Soul.
You're listening to The Jay Shapiro Show.
You're back with Jay Shapiro. In this segment of the program, I want to do what I call under the radar. These are items of news that don't get the big headlines, and they more or less describe what's happening here in the Middle East and also in the Jewish world. They're not related to each other. The first thing I want to start off with is the fact that the problem here in Palestine, all these years, since even before the founding of the state, the conflict here between the Arabs and Israel has been the basis for a lot of people to make a lot of money writing books and giving lectures, all of which don't amount to a hill of beans if you check back. I want to give an example. A couple of experts, I don't want to mention their names because that would be putting them on the spot. They wrote an article in the Jerusalem Post dealing with the fact that there might be a new administration in Washington come January. And I want to just sort of quote what they say. They wrote the following, for example: "Let us be clear, we are under no illusion about the serious challenges facing Israeli-Palestinian peace, but we hope that the Biden administration will enliven the opportunities for peace, and these must not be missed by the two contending parties and other states in the Middle East and beyond. Ultimately, it is up to Israelis and Palestinians to get to yes. Whatever path Biden pursues in the Middle East, it will not be in the service of his personal politics. He will be more of an honest broker and willing to apply the necessary pressure and other incentives for both Israeli and Palestinians to move them toward accommodation and peace. As Israeli and Palestinian leaders re-engage, it behooves them to stop any actions or statements that would contribute to a worsening of their relations. Both must be willing to take political risks through direct negotiations and to do so seriously and in good faith, meaning what they intend to reach agreement and commit to fulfilling its terms. It is urgent for Israelis and Palestinians to reimagine their relations and be the architects of their common destination and destiny. Two states living alongside each other in peace, security, and prosperity. The Biden administration can lend a helping hand, and so will other peace advocates around the world. Taking the first step should be done now, unquote. Now, I'm in favor of motherhood and virtue, and that's pretty much what these characters are writing about. It's totally meaningless. This kind of wording could have been written now. It could have been written back in 1920. It's all meaningless. All these people talking, they're actually making a living out of the conflict. It's no closer to being resolved now than it was back after the First World War. But that's a story unto itself. I just wanted to quote some of these words. This is all over the place. You see these kind of words. And like I said, there's an awful lot of people making a lot of money by giving lectures and by writing books about the Middle East. And if you take a look at some of these books, and I have a few right here on my shelf, if you cross off the date when it was written, it could have been written any time since 1919. It still wouldn't make any difference. So I just want to get that off my chest. Now we'll move on to the next item, which is not related to the previous one. Get ready for this one. The headline is Foreign Ministers Contract Virus After a European Union Meeting. The foreign ministers of Austria and Belgium have tested positive for coronavirus after attending a meeting with EU colleagues, raising concerns the gathering may have been a so-called super spreader event. Austria's and Belgium's representatives sat next to each other during a group breakfast of the EU Foreign Affairs Council. It's suspected that they might have been infected at the Foreign Affairs Council in Luxembourg. And they added that they didn't have symptoms that had been tested as a routine measure. So it's interesting, by the way, that the only thing that would seem to have been produced, or the only result of this European Union meeting of foreign ministers, was a couple came out of the meeting with the coronavirus. So at least there's some, I don't know if consider that a positive or a negative result. The next item, which is really way under the headlines, but it's kind of positive, and I want to share it with the listeners. A week ago, the Dutch Senate in Holland passed a motion calling for the Netherlands to vote against UN resolutions that use only the Arabic name for the Temple Mount, thus denying Judaism's connections to its holiest site. The motion asked the Dutch government, to vote as much as possible against UN resolutions referring to the Temple Mount using only the Arabic name Al-Haram al-Sharif, and to encourage other European Union countries to do the same. The Senate approved the motion with 50 in favor and 25 opposed. I'm sort of curious why the 25 were opposed, but that's beside the point. By the way, this is not the first time that lawmakers in Holland called on their government to vote with Israel at the UN. Back in 2017, the Dutch parliament called on the government to come out against the disproportionate focus on Israel at the United Nations institutions. This is a clear message, according to one of the lawmakers. This is a clear message against attempts by different factors to erase the historic connection of over 3,000 years between the Jewish people and Jerusalem. So there, it's under the headlines, but it is a positive move, and I wanted to share that with the listeners. Here's another item in a positive directions. On the same day that a small senior delegation from the United Arab Emirates, including the ministers of economy and finance and two deputy ministers, met in Israel, more than 650 people from 83 countries, including Israel and the United Arab Emirates, met on Zoom and on Facebook to make history. What was the history? They participated in a 4-hour conference sponsored by a non-governmental organization in Israel called Access Israel, promoting an inclusion and accessibility. And what they did was they have a person in the United Arab Emirates who is involved in what's called in something called employment of people with disabilities. And this person made a presentation simultaneously translated into Spanish, Russian, Hebrew, Arabic, and American Sign Language. So these are people involved in helping people with disabilities. And here you have people from a whole bunch of countries, including Israel and including the United Arab Emirates, working together and sharing ideas on how to help people with disabilities. And that really is a fantastic thing. That could be really a major byproduct of the peace agreements, where you do positive things that are not related at all to politics, but actually helping individual people in various countries. So that is fantastic. And I think that it's something, as I use it as under the radar, but I think it's something that should get much more attention, because it's one of the positive results of the agreement between Israel and the United Arab Emirates. And more should be known about it. And at last, here is another item which is both interesting and is sort of mind-boggling. The hottest new job title in Israel is happiness managers, which are also known as CHO, Chief Happiness Officer, or People Happiness Manager. Now, this trend has now reached Israel, and people are wondering, what does a happiness manager actually do? So one of these persons who has this position at one of the companies in Israel explains it as following. We work with everything that's connected to the happiness of the staff, what makes each person happy. Now, the question is a happiness manager another name for a therapist? Apparently not quite. They identify everyone's needs and how they can feel better at work. With different people, this means different things. One of them might need to sit and talk about his relationship because he's having a hard time, and another might need support because he wants to talk to his manager about his schedule and he's nervous about it. And it involves figuring out what kinds of assignments are best suited to each employee. Some people are very organized, others are detail-oriented, and so forth. So the happiness manager's job is to take these people and use their personal characteristics to make them happy, and at the same time do good work for the company. The bottom line, according to the experts in this new field, is workers need to feel that their well-being is important to the company. And that's what these managers are there for. We never had anything like that when I was active. Too bad. I always thought I was happy. Now it turns out maybe I wasn't. I'll be back after the break.
In a time where feelings have become fact, where rational thought and common sense has disappeared, one man stands above it all.
I'm Howie Sobiker, your political hitman.
Political Hitman airs every Tuesday at 11:59 p.m. North American time, 7 a.m. Israeli time, only on Israel News Talk Radio.
Are you interested in transforming your life, drawing closer to the Creator, and uncovering the deeper meanings and hidden treasures in the Hebrew Bible?
Then join me, Rav Yitzhak Michelson,
and me, William Hall,
on the Science of Kabbalah, where we are seeking to narrow the gap between what we understand of our physical and spiritual worlds. So make sure to tune in every Tuesday at 5 p.m. Israel time, 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, here on Israel News Talk Radio.
You're listening to The Jay Shapiro Show.
You're back with Jay Shapiro. In this segment of the program, I want to talk about several diverse items, which I think and I hope will be of interest to the listeners. First of all, I want to say a few short words about the percentage of American Jews who voted for the Democratic Party. Since I was a kid, the Democratic Party has been getting most of the Jewish vote, generally running over 80%. There were several exceptions, but the number really never went down too much. And now we had the same thing happening in the recent election. The Democratic Party candidate, Beiden, got about 85% of the Jewish vote. Now, it has rarely been a situation where an American president, although many have been extremely helpful to Israel, for example, Harry Truman recognized the state of Israel 12 minutes after it was announced by David Ben-Gurion, and other presidents have helped Israel in many ways, including with arms and all kind of agreements that allowed Israel to get needed supplies from the United States. Take example, the fact that during the Yom Kippur War, the American President Nixon enabled an airlift of very badly needed supplies, even against the wishes of his Secretary of State, Kissinger, who happened also to be Jewish. But generally, except for these exceptions, the American Jewish community, the voters, have given a very high percentage to the Democratic candidate. Now, what's happened this time, which I found very fascinating, is that Trump, the American president, did several things that were really mind-boggling when you think about it. Israel has been in a state of war with Arab nations since its very existence. Israel, but under the under the Trump administration, that was a mistake. But not just under a Trump administration, but with the help of the Trump administration, Israel was able to make peace agreements with the United Arab Emirates, with Bahrain, with Sudan. And Sudan, by the way, is a nation where in Khartoum, right after the Six-Day War, the Arab nations got together and issued the famous 3 no's, which of course included no recognition of Israel. At any rate, the Trump administration was able to get Bahrain, United Arab Emirates, and Sudan to make peace agreements with Israel, which is a fantastic breakthrough. No one could have predicted it. And by the way, after the election, we find that apparently something is happening with Saudi Arabia also. Our prime minister visited Saudi Arabia last Saturday night. All this is under the influence, the aid, and the initiative of the Trump administration. And by the way, the Secretary of State under Trump visited the Golan Heights, which was recognized by the Trump administration as being part of Israel. And of course, the American embassy was moved to Jerusalem. And the American Secretary of State visited a town called Pisgah, which is over the Green Line. In other words, it's part of what's known as the West Bank. So the Trump administration has been unbelievably friendly and helpful to the state of Israel. And yet, look at the voting in the recent election, the Trump administration got the usual 15% to 20% of the Jewish vote. In other words, there was no change in favor of Trump based upon what he has done for the state of Israel. So I think the conclusion has to be that this generation of American Jews simply are not interested in the state of Israel and what's good for the state of Israel. When I was a kid, my parents' generation, my generation, put the good of the state of Israel high on their list of priorities when they went to vote. But this is no longer true. So all kind of experts are giving all kind of analyses of the American Jewish vote. But the bottom line to me, and I'm certainly not an expert, the bottom line is that the state of Israel simply does not mean that much to the average Jew in America. The average Jew in America today is someone who was raised after the state came into being, after the Holocaust, and getting very little Jewish education. And therefore, the state of Israel simply is not high on the criteria by which they measure a president. And this, to me at least, I'm certainly not an expert. I don't write books on the topic, but it appears to me that there is a growing rift between the American Jewish community and Israel, as displayed in the fact that the Jewish community does not give much weight to the state of Israel and its relations to the United States when they go into the voting booth. To me, that seems pretty much like a fact, and whether it's good or bad in the long run, who knows? My own feeling is it's not good, but I just want to share that information with the listeners. You don't have to be a big expert to come to the conclusion that I do, that Israel is not high on the priorities of the American Jewish community. Switching to another object, which is not above the radar, it's under the radar, is something that happened in Quebec in Canada. The Jewish groups in Quebec are expressing great dismay after the province announcement of a plan that will allow small gatherings during the Christmas season, while saying at the same time that gatherings during Hanukkah would remain prohibited. This plan, which was announced by the province of Quebec, would permit people to have gatherings of up to 10 people per day for 4 days in late December, and a concession to the fact that families would likely gather even as the virus cases surged. Gatherings were not permitted during Canadian Thanksgiving last month, but people got together nonetheless, and cases soon surged throughout that country. Christmas, according to the Premier of Quebec, the holidays, Christmas, time of the year that's precious, and let's remember that family is the basis of our lives. This was a statement by the Premier of Quebec. Then he was asked whether any exceptions to the province's ban on gatherings would be allowed during Hanukkah, which this year, by the way, runs from December 10th to 18th, essentially the week before Christmas. The Prime Minister said no. So obviously that response is drawing criticism from Canadian Jewish groups. All of the groups in Canada, Jewish groups, came up with statements for essentially saying that the Premier has not addressed the concern and needs of several minority groups in Quebec. And when they said several minority groups, of course, they meant themselves, the Jews. The president of the B'nai B'rith Canada, said that the Quebec government must take the needs of minority communities, including the Jewish community, into consideration and work proactively with these communities prior to the lifting or imposition of unilateral restrictions because of the coronavirus. There must be no favoritism. The premier must be the premier of all Canadians, all Quebecans. And that's what he said. The very fact that the premier of Quebec didn't take the needs of the Jewish community in consideration speaks for itself. I don't know. I didn't check the percentage of Jews living in Quebec. But obviously, if the premier chose to ignore it, it means he really doesn't care about the Jewish community there. That's unfortunate, but it's true. One would like to think that the situation would be better, but that's the way it is. So having covered these little items now and sharing some of my thoughts about Israel and the Arab nations and the way the American Jews don't care about it, I'll sign off for this week, and I'll wish everybody a good week. I hope we have a quiet week. Things unfortunately, are never quiet. As I've mentioned in the past, that there's a Chinese blessing that says, I hope you live in quiet times. Unfortunately, we have never had that thing work out for the Jews for at least 2,000 years, if not for more. Until next week, then, Jay Shapiro signing off. Take care of yourselves.
Where can you get the inside news on Israel? At Israel News Talk Radio, we're dedicated to sharing Israel's inside story with the world by providing our listeners with news on Israeli politics, current affairs, and Israeli Jewish culture. The Israel News Talk Radio homepage also provides you, the listener, with useful information at your fingertips, with scrolling news headlines, weather, currency exchange, Shabbat candlelighting times, and so much more. Our radio programming is always accessible and on demand. We operate absolutely free of charge for everyone, everywhere. If you love what we do, partner with us now by becoming an Israel News Talk Radio supporter. With your support, you'll be inscribed on our Israel News Talk Radio Wall of Fame. There's nothing like us in the world. Be part of something great. Israel News Talk Radio. Straight talk from Israel.
Howdy, this is Rita from League City, Texas, now living in Israel. And though my heart may have belonged to Texas, it now belongs to Israel and all the fantastic show hosts at Israel News Talk Radio.
Hi, this is Michael Solomon from Kiryat Arba, Israel. And why do I love listening to Israel News Talk Radio? Because I love listening to the interesting interviews they do and their news reporting that most other media sources don't cover.
Hey, this is Nicoleko from Malmö, Sweden. It gets pretty cold here in Sweden, so I love cuddling up with a warm cup of tea while I listen to Israel News Talk Radio.
Hey everybody, this is Frank Morris from Tennessee. Me and my dog Buster really love listening to Israel News Talk Radio.
You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.
News, opinion, and more. You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.